it's a really important thing that we don't really consider, that like when an athlete does have that injury, that their identity is threatened, and that identity threat can put you at psychological risk of developing maybe not a clinical depression, but definitely symptoms of it.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, whose favorite toy as a child was her Simba, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me for Running for Real episode number 13. Hard to believe it's 13 episodes already. So last week we talked to Toby Tanser, and Evie Saventi actually. I did give you a bonus episode if you missed that one, so make sure you guys subscribe. If you have not already, that will mean they go directly to your phone, and when I throw out a bonus episode like that, you can get it straight to you without me having to remind you in situations like this. But Toby and I talked about the work he has been doing in Africa, how he started as a runner, training there for himself, but now he's helped hundreds of thousands of people and he's saved many lives in the process. It was a very moving episode. It showed all that is good and bad about this world, but it's definitely one to go back and listen to if you have not already. So today I thought we would go back to the psychology a little bit, but looking from more of a performance perspective. Jessie Barr is a professional runner or hurdler herself. She does the 400-meter hurdles and the 4x4. But she is also doing a PhD in sports psychology. And although she mostly focuses on elites, we can obviously take what she says and apply it to all of us. And it's really, really interesting. We focus a lot on the kind of identity loss that runners tend to go through, when you have an injury, if you have to stop running while you're changing direction in life, and just how much the psychology of, being a runner and saying that we identify as a runner, how much that affects us. It's really interesting, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So after a quick thank you to UCAN, we will begin. Smoothies, recovery bowl, bars, cookies, biscotti. What do all of those have in common? Any ideas? You can make them with Generation UCAN. How's that for a win-win? Learn more about Generation UCAN at generationyoucan.com, and I will give you a coupon code later in the episode for 10% off. Jessie, I am so excited to have you join me on the Running for Real podcast. Welcome to the show. I'm really excited.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be part of it.
Yeah, no, this is great. And, you and I were just talking a few moments ago about, my kind of background, your background. And I was saying to the audience listening, I actually saw Jessie followed me on Twitter a few weeks ago. And I've been trying to follow Jessie for years now. And I saw her follow me, and I thought, oh, this is my chance. And I'm so excited that we managed to get this together so quickly once I was able to find you. So this is going to be a really exciting one, I can tell. And I want to start it off on a light note. So maybe tell us a fun fact or a hidden talent that you could share with the audience that most people wouldn't know.
Okay. It might not have much relevance in terms of the UK, but when I was about 10 years old, I was an extra on a show called Ballykiss Angel.
Oh, wow. That is cool.
Yeah. So my early introduction to the small screen, it was a very fleeting gig. It wasn't anything major, but it was something unusual and not something many people know. And it always gets a bit of a laugh when I tell, especially people over here, because Ballykiss Angel is probably was the equivalent of Home and Away for Australians, one of those kind of shows that wasn't overly popular, but
I definitely remember
it's a good laugh.
That's cool.
Yeah, you remember it? Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And do you just how do you just go to an audition for that, or was it someone picked you up?
No, it was a friend of my mum and dad. Worked in the production team, and they were looking for extras. They were shooting a race day, so they were at the horse races and they needed loads of people. So myself and my friend were like, we'll do it. We thought we were superstars. We were 10 years old. We got 70 pounds into our hands and we thought we were superstars. So.
That is awesome. That's a really cool fun fact. Yeah. So moving on to why we're actually here, one of the reasons. So you competed in the London Olympics in the 400 hurdles and the 4x4, which I must have seen you because I definitely went to quite a few of the days. So that's kind of cool for me thinking back on that, that I was probably watching. But so most listeners are never going to get the chance to race either the 400 or the 4x4. So I thought, I know this might be kind of hard for you because you're so like used to it, but maybe if you could describe like what it's like to run both of those events for someone, you know, maybe a runner who picked it up at age 35 and never had the opportunity to do something like that.
Okay, I'll stop you before we go any further. Unfortunately, I didn't run in the Olympics in the 400 hurdles.
Oh, okay.
I was very close.
Okay.
So I don't want anyone looking me up and going, hang on. No, you're fine. I did have the B standard, which is like a slightly slower standard. So I was within 0.4 of a second of qualification. Mm-hmm. So I did get to go for the relay, but I kind of felt like I got in there, like kind of through the back door by getting the relay. The hurdles, what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But to get back to your question, I suppose anyone who hasn't run the hurdles and are like a road runner or more into distance, the 400 hurdles is nicknamed the man killer. Mm-hmm. Like it is probably, now I haven't done a lot of track events. I've done a 1500 once and it was the worst thing I ever did. I've done 800s as part of like heptathlons and pentathlons when I was younger, but the 400 hurdles is just the perfect combination of speed and endurance. So basically imagine you're sprinting at 90% of your capacity for a minute, and it doesn't sound like much, but it's probably the most tired your legs will ever be. Mm-hmm. Like that real heavy lead feeling. Lactic acid is building, which basically just makes everything burn and everything feels like cement is slowly drying in all your body parts, and nothing wants to keep going. And when you're feeling like that, you have to jump over a hurdle, which is just below your hip height. So the most tired you've ever been, and you know that feeling when you're at the end of a race and your legs are giving up and you just need to get to the finish line, but 40 meters from that finish line, you're going to have to jump over something so your legs can't fully go. Mm-hmm. So it's a mentally very tough event, and physically it's horrific. It's exhausting. And whenever I tell people about it, they go, "Why do you do it? Why do you do the 400 hurdles?" Because it's the only event I can do. So, and yeah, it's one of those events that it's very, very satisfying when it's going well. Mm-hmm. But when it's not going well, it's horrific because it's just, you're always tired. No matter how fast or slow you run a race, you're always going to be exhausted. So it's trying to describe that feeling of the agony that you feel in your legs. Like it's very, very different. It's not that real aerobic fatigue. Mm-hmm. It's a real kind of burning sensation. Yeah. So I mean, everyone should try it.
If anyone listening, if you have, just sprinted to try and sprint for as long as you can, as hard as you can, and that point where it literally feels like your body is shutting down and you are barely moving anymore, that's kind of what she's talking about here. And
pretty much.
So then I'm sure people are wondering, with any kind of like new runners, they will think that once you get to a certain point, it kind of gets easier. Like it's like, once I reach this point, it'll be easier. So you're saying it doesn't ever get to that point with the 400 hurdles? Like even if you were having a great race, that things get easier or it burns less, I guess? Yeah,
I suppose as you train, like obviously we train to build up a tolerance to that mm-hmm. lactic acid.
Yeah.
So it does get easier, but because the more you train, obviously the faster you're going to get. Mm-hmm. So you're just probably maybe getting a little bit further into the race before that lactic acid hits, but you're never going to meet a 400 hurdler, no matter how good they are, that has never hit lactic. Mm-hmm. That lactic acid is that horrible pain that builds up.
Yeah.
So it just means you have a tolerance of it that maybe instead of getting to 300 and it starts to hurt, you might get to 320 or 340. Mm-hmm. But realistically, by the time you get to that last hurdle at 360 meters into the race, you're in a lot of pain.
Mm-hmm. And I have to ask, have you ever fallen at that last hurdle?
I actually haven't.
Oh,
I've caught my knee. I've hit my knee off the hurdle a few times, but thankfully I've never fallen in a race. Touch wood. Find some wood in the room to touch because I haven't. I've fallen in training quite a bit, which mm-hmm. is fine, but no, thankfully in a race I've yet to fall, and I hope this isn't going to be the start of it now, having mentioned this.
And then what about the 4x4? Maybe tell, for someone who would never get the chance to race a 4x4, what does that feel like?
The 4x4 is super exciting, but very, very nerve-wracking. So my second ever 4x4 for the Irish team was at the Olympics. I had never really been put on the team before. So I went to the World Championships the year before in 2011, which is when we qualified, but I was there as a sub. But I kind of ran much better in 2012. to warrant a place on the team. So one of the girls who would have qualified us through, I replaced her. So that was kind of awkward anyway. So there's always that interesting dynamic with a team when there's 6 on the squad and you don't really know who's going to be in the final running for. But the 4x4 is always such an exciting event. Like at most championships, it's the last event of the whole championships. And it's just, even though 4x1 obviously is really exciting because it's really, really fast, it's over so quickly you nearly don't really get a chance to know what's going on. Like it's the baton is at the finish line before you've even kind of realized who has won it. Whereas with the 4x4, it lasts for, 3.5 minutes. So you have enough time to kind of really get into the race and get behind people. And there's a lot of jostling and there's people can be passed. In the 4x1, when someone's in the lead, they're probably in the lead for the race. Whereas with the 4x4, all sorts of things can happen. People can bump each other. You're not staying in lane. So when I ran in London, we have one girl on the team. She was very much our anchor runner, and she would always run a really, really good strong leg. I ran third. She ran second. And she has an amazing relay ability. She's one of those people put a baton in her hand and she will just run a second or two faster than she ever has individually. And so I knew that. So what was most nerve-wracking about that is that she was running to me and I was like, oh my God, she's just made up such a good place. She passed 2 people and on her leg alone. And I was like, all I was thinking when she's coming towards me was, please don't lose her position. Please don't lose her position. And it's so stressful because as an individual athlete, and when you're so used to running for yourself, running for a team and having 3 other people depend on you, it makes you run so much faster. But I remember I'd say the first 200 of that race in London, I probably ran the fastest I'd ever ran for the start of a 400 because I remember my legs at about 200 meters. I was thinking, I'm never going to get to the finish line.
Oh, no.
This was a terrible idea. But it's so exciting, and the adrenaline and warming up with a team is so nice because we're so not used to that. And always kind of having 3 other people with you, or if when you're training, there's 5 other people. And it's lovely. And as an individual athlete, you just don't get that kind of camaraderie. Usually everyone's kind of out for themselves.
Yeah. That's so true.
So, and it's really, really exciting. And I know it's a really exciting race to watch, whether you're into athletics or not. So it's cool. It's not my favorite event. I much prefer having the barriers to jump. I much prefer having hurdles. I just find that at least with the relay, you have that there's someone in the lane in front of you and you're always trying to catch or trying not to be caught by people. But a 400 hurdles, it's kind of 400 hurdlers like relay for that reason. A lot of 400 hurdlers don't like running the 4 flat or without any hurdles, like in an individual race, because you just get bored. Because you're so used to having something every 5 seconds to concentrate on that you don't really, the race is over before you even realize. So the 4x4 is like that there's constantly something to think about, whether it's how far the person is ahead of you. This girl is starting to come, I have to get my elbows out. But yeah, it was like in the Olympics, it was so exciting. It was so nerve-wracking because my time on the track was probably about 60 seconds altogether. They literally, they lined us up on the side of the track, and you only were brought onto the track when the girl who was running ahead of you was at 200 meters. So when she was about between 200 and 300 meters, they line you up on the track. So you have kind of 10 seconds to appreciate the stadium, look around, and then you're running, and then you're kind of moved off the track again. So didn't get much time to actually enjoy the whole experience of being on the track. But no, it was an amazing experience. And the 4x4 it's a really cool event for anyone to watch, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. And so, you ran in London and, last year was Rio, and obviously after that kind of taste for things, you would have wanted to run in Rio even more for your event. So, but you actually struggled with injuries, most of the time from what I've read. And so how did you kind of manage to stay like appreciative of your body during that time? Because like, I can imagine like if you kept having injuries and you're like, oh, why is this happening to me now? Like, how did you kind of stay grateful for what it had done and what it has left to do when all those things were going wrong?
Oh, it took a lot. And I suppose, so after London, obviously I was within like less than half a second from qualifying. So I thought, well, I've done this. I'd had a very, very good year in 2011 and 2012. So I thought, God, if I can improve this much and be within this much of qualification for London, Rio is going to be so easy. And I just never even considered that I wasn't going to be in Rio. Like that was just the plan. Like I even said after London, I'd always said I was going to get the Olympic rings tattoo if I went to the Olympics.
Yeah.
And then when I didn't get there other than for the relay, because I always felt like I got in that back door, I said, when I go to Rio, and it was always when, not if, it was always when I go to Rio, then I'll get the rings because I've got there for the hurdles and I've got there for my event. And unfortunately, with like occupational hazard with athletics is that injuries happen. Unfortunately, I was probably just hit with more injuries than like the usual athlete would be. So I kind of, it was kind of when it was like when I got one injury, my first kind of bad injury was in 2014. I got a stress fracture in my foot. I had moved to Bath in the UK after London, and we did a lot more kind of endurance stuff, longer running on the roads, which I just wasn't used to. I'd always done all my training on the track or kind of on the grass. So I'd say the way I ran just didn't suit it. So I gave myself a stress fracture in my foot. So that was my first time I was out for a long time. And it was my first major injury and it was stressful, but I was like, I'll get back. And it kind of gave me a new appreciation for how much you wanted. And I think that injuries do that after an injury, you're like, it kind of makes you reevaluate how much you want to be back running. And when you're not able to run and you're on a bike or you're in the pool, you're like, this is exactly what I want to do. And I really want to get back and I want to get back better. And that's what I kept doing. And unfortunately, it was like that just started a chain of injuries. And there was a lot of lower limb things. Achilles tendinopathies, calf tears. It was always lower limb. So I'm sure there was something mechanical going wrong. But yeah, and I always, because I was kind of getting glimpses that when I was training, getting glimpses of like really good training. And when I was training, I was running really well. Like in 2015, for example, we went away on a warm weather training camp over Easter. We went to Spain, which we do every year. And I was running the best I'd ever ran. I was running PBs in training all the time. And I was in really, really good shape. The shape that I was going to probably run really, really good times, qualify for championships and maybe make it through rounds. Like that was the kind of shape I was in. Like my coach couldn't even believe how good shape I was in. And unfortunately, at the end of that camp, coming back, I picked up my first Achilles tendinopathy. And it's those glimpses of really good training and when I'm running really well is what's kept me going. Yeah. If I hadn't had that really good training at that warm weather training camp, I don't know would I still be running. Because I probably feel like my best is behind me and all these injuries are probably my body telling me you're not really able for it anymore and maybe it's time to stop. But when I do manage to get fit in the kind of breaks in between all these injuries that have happened, I do get back to good shape. So I did. I think last year I started to kind of lose trust in my body, that I nearly didn't trust myself going training. And, if it had been 3 or 4 weeks of uninterrupted training, I was nearly waiting for something else to happen.
Yes.
And I was starting to lose trust. I was kind of just thinking, why I do all this hard work and it just breaks down again. What is going on? I felt like my body was just letting me down all the time. And I think like I got to the stage where I was like, I'd come back so many times and I'd, got the injury, went into rehab, went to the physio, did all the stuff, did all the slow return to running, and then got something else maybe 2 months down the line. And it was just a constant cycle. And it just became routine. Like it was actually just normal if I picked up an injury that I was gone for a month again and I was rehabbing. It was just the norm. It would have been strange for me if I had 6 months that I wasn't on a bike or I wasn't in the pool. So I think because Rio was always in my mind and that was always my goal, that kept me going. And I was like, well, I just want to get there. I want to get to champions. I want to do this. So then after Rio, when another injury kind of prevented me from qualifying for that, that's when I was like, okay, maybe I need to take a step back here. It's been 3 seasons in a row that I've been, doing this and not getting any, working hard for and getting no reward for it. Like maybe I need to reevaluate what I'm doing. But up until then, I was very much just get an injury, back into routine, back to rehab.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say now you can look back on this time and, we're going to go into what you've been kind of studying about. I mean, I'm sure your story has resonated with a lot of people who are in that injury cycle, like you said, kind of expecting things and just continue to happen. And now what you've learned, which we'll talk about in a second, what would you say to anyone listening who was just hearing you talk there and thinking, yes, that's me?
Yeah, I was interviewed by an Irish online article. There's an online article that they're mainly all on Twitter and online, and asked me similar things. And it was the first time I'd really kind of went into detail about my injuries and the kind of what I'd been through and blah, blah, blah. And I got such a positive reaction. I realized that so many people go through this.
Yeah.
And you kind of feel like you're the only one, especially when I was in a training group where, they might pick up one injury and then they're back and that was it. And I was like, why is it always me? Why does it keep happening? And I think I just put it down to bad luck. I didn't want to say, okay, there's probably issues that I was probably not looking after myself, or maybe skipping steps at the very end and coming back that bit too fast. But yeah, I think what I've learned from it, and what I learned when I came back after Rio, Rio was kind of the last straw when I didn't qualify. Watching that was really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And in September after Rio, I went back into training like I usually do. Every September you go back, and I was there for a couple of weeks, and we're starting to get back into the kind of winter slog. And I was just like, I'm just not enjoying this. And I remember I was actually in bad mood at training. We'd be warming up at the indoor part. We have a big arena here where I'm based in Limerick. We have an indoor arena with a stretch of tracks. We used to always warm up in there and head out to the outdoor track, which is next door. And I remember just, going through the rigmarole, doing my drills and my warm up, and just thinking, I actually just don't know if I can do this for another 4 years, do this same thing again and again, and just lost the enjoyment completely.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of starting to question, why am I here then? And I was in a bad mood, and I could feel it, that I was in a bad mood. And it's not nice when you're in a bad mood to be with everyone else. And I didn't want to feel that I was like this emotional contagion, that if I'm in a bad mood, everyone else is going to be kind of walking on eggshells around me. So I started to kind of pull back from training and maybe going and doing my own thing a bit, and just pulling away from the group and thinking, maybe this is what I need to do. Because, everyone was talking about their summer and everyone had been competing and I've been watching them. And again, it was me always just saying, well, it was great, watching you all, you were all brilliant. So I ended up kind of giving myself an unofficial retirement eventually. I remember sitting here and I was just doing something. I was doing work or something. And my boyfriend was here and I was just kind of like, actually, maybe I just need to quit. And it was the first time I'd ever thought it. I'd never thought it before that. And I actually was like, actually, maybe that isn't a bad idea, because it had just given me nothing but hardship and sadness for the last 3 years, that I'd gotten nothing positive back from athletics. I'd only gotten injuries and knockbacks and being cut from funding and watching people doing well when I'm sitting on a bike rehabbing or doing my boring exercises. And it was really refreshing. I was actually like, you know what, maybe I'm going to do that. And I really enjoyed it. And up until maybe Christmas time, I didn't do any exercise. It was probably the most unfit I've ever gotten. And I didn't train, I didn't run, I didn't go to the gym. I just avoided all things and kind of lived like a normal, I say in inverted commas, a normal life. And I really enjoyed it. And I was very busy. I'm doing PhD at the moment. So I got really, really busy in those couple of months. So it kind of gave me the excuse to not to go to training. So I didn't actually even feel guilty about not going. Like that guilt that you'd usually get when you've missed training because something else is going on, that just wasn't there.
I felt the same
sitting
way.
there in my office. And sitting in my office in college and looking at the time, and it's 6 o'clock. That's usually when I was heading to the track to start warming up. And I was going, actually, no, I've work to do and I'm getting so much more done. I'm just going to stay here. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, you know what, actually, maybe I do need to just stop. And it was only when I stopped being busy that I actually started to miss it again. So I kind of made the slow reintroduction in kind of December, January to training and just find that enjoyment again.
Yeah.
And I kind of sat down with the coaches and I kind of talked about everything that I was going through, and they knew well by me. So they were kind of like, look, make your own way back. And I kind of said, look, I'm going to dip in and out of sessions at the moment, do what I want to do what I enjoy. And that's what I did. And I kind of had to refine the enjoyment, because I always started athletics when I was younger for enjoyment. And somewhere along the way, I lost that. Yeah. When you're 12 years old, I wasn't in athletics because I was the superstar kid or because I wanted to win medals. That wasn't it. I was in it because I loved doing it and I loved seeing my friends and I loved trying to improve and get better. And obviously when I got a bit better as I kind of went into my late teens, early 20s, it was always about qualifying for championships and running personal bests. And I somewhere along the way forgot to enjoy it all. Yeah. And I hadn't enjoyed it. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just trying to get back strong, get back fit and stay in one piece and just enjoy it again.
Yeah. And I think that's more common.
Big long rant there.
Yeah. We've had a lot of people on lately who have talked about the same thing. I've obviously gone through that. Tom Payne talked about that. Amelia Boone talked about that. We've had a lot of people talk about this. And I think what Jessie's saying is that if you are struggling and if you are not enjoying it and you are stuck in that injury cycle, there's nothing wrong with stepping away for a little while and completely beginning again, rather than just banging your head into a brick wall and trying to keep just forcing it, which doesn't work. So you obviously found your PhD and you started to work on that, and you have been working on this for a while, focusing on sports psychology. And so the reason I wanted to have you on was because you've done a lot of focus on injuries and how they affect identity. And there really isn't much out there about how this does affect identity. There's a lot on how to rehab your injuries, how to come back from an injury, but there really isn't much about like the identity crisis that we go through. So maybe you could tell us about what you've learned and, how the psyche is affected by injuries.
Yeah, I suppose so. What I'm doing my PhD, I'm in my second year. I'm kind of in the kind of mental health well-being with a lot of focus, like I said, on injury, which obviously because of my own personal experiences, I'm able to give kind of a personal perspective that like other researchers probably wouldn't be able to do, which makes it interesting. And yeah, what I find, and I think any athlete can kind of resonate with this, is that like when you've been an athlete for so long, if you identify, so basically what you call it is like athletic identity. So how much you identify being an athlete. So like Tina, if I was to ask you, like, who are you? And you were to say, oh, I'm an athlete. If that's your defining identity, if when you get injured and you can no longer be an athlete because you're maybe not able to run anymore and you're not able to do that thing that defines you, you kind of go through like an identity crisis. Your identity is threatened, and you kind of think, well, what am I now if I can't run for the next 6 months? Like, who am I? What am I? And it happens a lot with like professional athletes, elite athletes who don't have anything else going on. I'm very lucky that I've always been studying. I've been in university all the way through my running career, so I've always had something else going on. But even when I was in the UK, my master's was very much just secondary to my training. Like the master's kind of was just something that I did in the background, but I would never have called myself a master's student. I was an athlete, I was a runner, I was a hurdler. And I think when you're injured, especially when you've been injured a long time, like my identity is nearly more like chronic rehabber than athlete anymore. And I think it's a really important thing that we don't really consider, that like when an athlete does have that injury, that their identity is threatened, and like that identity threat can put you at risk, like psychological risk of, developing kind of maybe not a clinical depression, but definitely symptoms of it. I know whenever I was injured, my motivation could get quite low, and even the idea of going to do rehab is hard as it is. But even to do normal things, like if you're sitting around, you find yourself sitting around all day and you just couldn't be bothered even getting up to make food. I could be starving and I'm like, couldn't be bothered with the idea of cooking. I don't really want to do this. And I just found that, especially when I was in Bath at the time, that I could spend days just sitting on the couch watching TV, and I'd go and do my bit of rehab in the morning, and then my whole day I had nothing else to do. Like,
would you kind of justify yourself as I'm recovering, like I'm resting?
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, but I have to rest. I'm injured. I have to recover, and I can't do anything. Oh, I'm in a boot. I can't do anything, and you allow yourself. And I think that was the worst thing ever. So I try to be more proactive when I'm injured now, and I'm trying to do whatever I can. And I'm trying to see injury is a horrible thing, and it's a negative, of course, but trying to kind of put it on the flip side and see the positives, to say, okay, well, I'm injured now. I never get to work on my upper body strength. Like my legs will be quite strong. My upper body is pathetically weak. This is a chance for me to go and maybe work on those, or maybe I have more time that I can get those essays done that I wouldn't have been able to do if I was training twice a day for college or for university, or work on my aerobic capacity by going and doing lengths in the pool or going on a bike and seeing the opportunities that you can take from it. And it's difficult. It's difficult to do that when you're an athlete, because all you want to do is run and all you want to do is train. And it's just trying to find the positives in that and see the opportunities that are there, with maybe the extra time that you have. But yeah, the identity thing is huge. I think any athlete that is listening can understand that feeling that like, oh, who am I now and what am I going to do? And all you get asked is, oh, you're injured and how's the calf and when you be back running? And they're probably the worst questions you can ask someone, because if you have an injury that you don't have a certain timeline,
you kind of go, most don't.
No, you don't know when I'm going to be back. And that's worse. You kind of, again, you're going, oh God, I don't know when I'm going to be back being an athlete. And,
so then what would you say to someone who's maybe a family or friend listening who has someone who is injured? What would be a good thing to say instead of saying, how's your calf or whatever?
Yeah, I think it is very hard for someone who's, I know I can be guilty of doing this, that I ask someone in the training group, like my brother, who's an athlete as well. Like when he had a hip injury last year in the lead up to Rio, you can't help it when you see them be like, how's the hip? And you just kind of do it without even thinking. So it's obviously, if you're not an athlete, you think you're being really good. And I know when I've been injured, if I've been at home, my mum was always, how is it now today? And you'll be fine and you'll be back and you'll be great and you're going to be back in time and you'll get back and you'll get to race. And I never did. And I was going, Mum, I probably won't. She's like, you will. You just have to be patient and you have to be positive. And I'm like, I'm being positive, but I have to be realistic as well. So I think it depends, I suppose. Your family and friends are going to be the people that know you best, and they know how you react. I mean, some people probably want to be mothered and want to be kind of babysat and looked after. But I think the best thing you can do is just be encouraging and highlighting when someone's improved or highlighting when someone has done something, rather than being like, you've got 3-4 weeks, you'll be back in time. I actually have a friend who's a rugby player. I remember having conversations like this, that her mum wanted to be really positive and say, you've got 4 weeks, you can get so much done in 4 weeks. She's like, you don't understand, I don't have 4 weeks because I have 4 weeks until the match, not 4 weeks to just get back running. So I think with like parents and friends, just be encouraging and going to the gym and reminding them why they're doing it. And yeah, it's a tough one to give advice because I suppose it depends. Like I said, some athletes like to kind of be mollycoddled and be told, you're doing great and you're going to be back in no time, whereas I don't want to hear that. Mm-hmm. I'm like, don't, Mum, don't tell me that. I know when I'll be back.
So then maybe would you say, if you are a family and friend who is listening and you do have someone who's injured, ask them at the very beginning, like, how do you want me to treat you? Or on the other side of things, if you are that injured person, kind of saying to your friends and family at the beginning, like, I know you might be trying to help, but if you tell me it's going to be okay when I don't know it is, that doesn't help. But can you please or whatever it is? Would you say that's a good way to do it, like right at the beginning?
I think the way to do it is the athlete needs to be the one to approach it.
Okay.
Because your friends and family are just trying to look out for you and they're doing their best. And I think just snapping back, and I've learned that myself, that snapping back is not the right way to go, because then they're going to go the other way and they want to talk to you. I think if you sit your mum and dad or whoever you're with down and kind of say, look, I'm going to have my up days, I'm going to have my down days.
Yeah.
If you can just try and be patient or whatever. And I think for the kind of friends and family, the support system, their most important role is sometimes just acting as distraction. Okay. They might not even realize, but just by being there and chatting about other stuff and not saying, how's your rehab going? Because we all know how our rehab is going. It's probably the exact same as it was yesterday and the exact same as it was last week. I'm seeing minor improvements. So acting as that distraction and someone who's just going to go and do stuff with you that's completely taking your mind off it. And maybe
So I was going to say, surely that's helping with the whole like identity thing that we were talking about. Like if you kind of remind them that there's more to life than just their sport, they have more to offer than just their sport. Yeah. They love you for not what you do, but like who you are, then that's not having you like dwell on what your identity as a runner. Would that be right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Like when I was in my boot with my stress fracture, I actually moved home for 3 months because I just didn't have that support network in the UK, because everyone that was my friend was also my training partners.
Yes.
And I just didn't want to be around them. So I moved back home, and I had 2 of my friends who were still living at home as well. So we kind of spent a lot of time together. One of them was unemployed, and one happened to have been in a ski accident, so had done damage to her knee. So she was on crutches, I was in a boot, and my other friend was unemployed. So we were this kind of support network for each other.
Yeah.
And there was never talk about rehab or the crutches or how's your job hunt going, because we all had this thing that was going on that we didn't really want to be discussing because it wasn't exactly positive. So we just hung out all the time. We'd go to the cinema. We'd just do stuff together that was distracting, especially when I probably would have been training usually in the evenings or morning sessions. So I'd do my rehab and then I'd have my whole day. We'd make sure that in the evening we always did something that was taking our mind off what we should be doing.
That's good.
And I thought that was really good. Just having someone like that reminding you that, and they don't, all my friends, my friends from home are not into athletics. They're not into sport.
No,
so they don't care about and they don't get rehab. They don't get injuries. They're just like, oh, well, now we have more time spent with you. Yay.
Yes, exactly.
And they just see it as a positive, and they think, oh, if you get back running, you're great. If you win a medal, you're great. If you come last, you're great. Mm-hmm. And they're the people I wanted to be around because they just didn't get it. And so they didn't know the questions to ask. They just didn't ask. Mm-hmm. And I found surrounding myself with those people was probably the best thing for me, because they just wanted to hang out with Jessie. They didn't care about Jessie, the athlete. That was just something they didn't really understand. And they don't really get why I had to train.
Yeah.
So I think it's very individual and finding what works for you. Some people might want to hang out with other injured athletes and do their rehab together. And I think that can be really good because it can be quite lonely, especially when even though you're an individual athlete, you tend to train in groups. So it's finding what works for you and sticking to that.
Okay. All right. No, that's helpful.
There's no one size fits all,
No,
unfortunately.
yeah, as much as that would be nice, I think you're exactly right in every way. Okay, let's kind of flip to the other side of things. So when you are in good shape, you do get to the start line healthy. You had goals for it for Rio. Other runners have it for training for a race like getting a Boston qualifier, but how do you make sure that when you get to the start line that you don't underperform because you have put all this expectation on yourself? Because I saw you've kind of researched this a little bit as well about underperforming.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think thinking about underperforming straight away is just not a good thing. You just always go in. I'm very realistic. There's some people who are, they say that you have to go in with a winning mentality, that you're going to win this race or nothing. And I'm very realistic that I'm stepping on the start line with girls who are 2, maybe 3 seconds faster than me sometimes, and people who have won world medals. I'm going, I have to be realistic here. What am I going to be happy with? What will I be unhappy with? And go on how your training's been going. Like, I think everyone always has a fair idea. Okay, maybe your first race, you might be a bit rusty and you're not sure where you're at. But once you've done one race or you've been doing lots of very good training, that you've been keeping track of where you're at, I think you have to be very, very realistic when you stand on the start line and say, this is where I'm at. This is what I am capable of doing. And only I know chasing standards, and it can be very stressful that every time you stand on the start line, you know what you need to run, and I have to run this.
Yes.
But I think thinking about that and having that as your goal, that's an extrinsic goal. And always chasing those goals that are something outside of your control is very, very difficult. All you can do is do your absolute best and think about how, okay, training's went really, really well for the last month. And there's no reason if I don't put my race plan into practice that I won't do it. But thinking about the end time when you still have a whole race to run is pretty much pointless, because you're going to run the race, but you don't have huge control over what that time is. So I tend to not think about what the end time is going to be. I try not to anyway. Obviously, you always have in the back of your head that I need to get this time, and this is the time that you have highlighted and you've underlined in your training diary. But just trying to do the best race you can every time, and going through each step. I know obviously I have 10 hurdles, so I just try when I'm actually racing, I'm thinking about each hurdle, what I need to do at this stage. I'm at 200 meters. What do I need to do to 300 meters? What do I need to get home? And if I put that plan into place, and if I've come up with the time, brilliant. But yeah, I think standing on the start line and just thinking, I need to run this time, I need to run this time, you're already tense, you're already nervous, and probably your race plan's going to go out the window, especially if you're in like a marathon situation and you're seeing other people doing their own thing. It can be very easy to get caught up and say, well, actually, she's really quick and I know she's probably going to get the time, so I'll stick with her, even though you know that your race plan didn't say that. Your race plan was very, very different to what that person's probably done. So I think it's just thinking about the controllables and what you've done, what you know you can do, and what you're in control of, which is your own race. You're not really in control of the clock. Remind yourself of the preparation you've done and how prepared you are to run, and go into it with, an acceptance that if you run this, brilliant, but if you don't, it's not the end of the world, because there is always going to be a chance you won't run the race that you want to run.
Okay.
And I know that's horrible. I've just learned it over the years that I have to be very realistic, because I've had too many disappointments to think, if I don't run this time, it is the end of the world, and I will be heartbroken for years, because another race will come. Okay, it might be your last chance to qualify, but it just wasn't meant to be that time.
Yeah.
But I think all you can do is get all the preparation done, and then like that, control your controllables. Do you have your race plan in place? Do your normal routine the morning of, all that kind of stuff.
No, that's helpful. And then what about someone who, they did stay calm, they did have a good race, it did all click together, they did run the time they wanted. And, for you, like going into Rio, maybe you had this, or like the training for Rio, or maybe, someone who's run their dream time. How do you kind of get out of the thinking, well, it's all downhill from here? I've done my ultimate goal. Like, what can I do now? Have you kind of researched about that? Like if someone's really struggling with motivation now, they have done that one big thing they wanted to do. Yeah,
that's a tough one. I haven't done much research myself, but I've done a lot of reading, especially in the kind of the depression literature, that like when people maybe an Olympic champion or something, that was their ultimate dream from 5 years old. I want to win an Olympic gold medal, and they do. And then it's kind of like, well, what? Yeah, exactly that. What do I do now? I've done everything I can. And I suppose if you are staying in the sport, it's just kind of looking at where you can make improvements on yourself. So obviously chasing an Olympic gold like that, again, is this extrinsic motivation. So you're chasing a reward that's kind of out of your control. So maybe you could say, well, I've run an absolute personal best. Where can I squeeze another 0.2 of a second out of myself for next year and make sure I retain that title and be world champion next year, or run that little bit faster and improve my record, improve my Irish record, improve my personal best. And that's all I think that's the only way you can motivate yourself, is to look within yourself and where you can find your own improvements. Because I think when you've already reached that goal that you've set yourself, it's very, very difficult to try and set yourself another goal, especially if it's an Olympic gold medal. What's above that? There isn't really anything. So then it's looking to improve yourself, and maybe, okay, you've achieved all this. Where can you get stronger in the gym? Can you maybe take a little bit of time off your 200 meter PB because your 400 meter hurdles PB has probably reached its limit, and just try and make your own improvements in other areas if you are going to stay in the sport. I think that's the only way to keep motivation for me anyway.
No, that's great. And then you did talk about, like an Olympic champion or someone, I know you've done most of your work on Olympic athletes and how they handle things. So did you find that there was a lot of that identity loss when people retired from the sport? Like, was it kind of a big transition time for athletes who no longer have that sport in their life? Do most people stay involved in it, or is it like a complete cutoff?
Yeah. Retirement is a very tricky transition. How you react to it depends on that athletic identity. So how much you identified as being an athlete, whether it was a voluntary retirement or you're forced into it through injury, or if you're prepared for it. So if you had something set up that, I know what career I'm going into next, I have my degree, I'm qualified, I have a good CV. If you don't have any of that, that's when you're going to struggle after retirement. And even the idea of retiring sometimes can even be distressing for people. Not even if they're years away from it, just thinking about what next. That can even cause distress for people. So I suppose when it comes to retirement, the only way you can kind of guarantee a smooth transition is if you are 100% ready for it. Now, sometimes that just doesn't happen, especially when you get like a major injury and you're told you'll never run again. That can be really scary. So if that is to be the case, you probably should be planning as early as possible what I'm going to do. So whether it is staying in college, I see a lot of athletes that kind of drop out of college and just want to focus on running. And you think when you're 30, you're going to be starting a whole new career again. And, I've read in the literature that sometimes athletes will refer to retirement as like their first death of two deaths. So their first death is the death of their athletic career, and then death is their actual dying at whatever age, which is a really scary thought, but that's the way some people can look at it. And to avoid kind of feeling like that, it's having a plan in place and knowing what you're going to do afterwards, even if it's a vague plan that you think, well, I have this business degree, I wouldn't mind going and doing something in that. Just having some sort of plan in place that you kind of know which way you're going to go, whether it is staying in sport, whether it's getting completely away from it. I know some people like to stay in touch with the sport, maybe get involved with coaching or kind of management, or stay involved in kind of like some sort of way. And some people want nothing to do with it. I know, obviously, I've went into the sports psychology side, so I'd love to work with athletes. I'd love to work in sport. Whether I'd like to be as close as a coach, I don't think so. But I definitely would like to work with athletes, because athletes get other athletes. And I think I'd like to be able to use my expertise and my knowledge of being an athlete to benefit others. But yeah, I think when it comes to retirement, it is a case of just being prepared as possible and kind of knowing that this is an inevitable transition. It's going to happen. You're not going to be an athlete for the rest of your life. And having something in place for afterwards, that you don't finish and you kind of go, because that's the biggest identity crisis, because you go, well, I'm not an athlete at all anymore. I need to find my new who am I, my new identity. And if you have something in the back burner, even if it's something minor, I see lots of athletes now are making cookbooks. Every athlete knows how to cook healthily or knows how to eat healthily, maybe not cook so well. I'm not the best cook, but just having something, a new passion for when you finish.
Absolutely. That's
is
great.
Probably the biggest way to ease that transition.
Okay. And then just something I'm curious, kind of in a selfish way, but I'm sure a lot of people will be interested. So you mentioned about like how you exit the sport. And, I've had a lot of people say to me, I said to you even before we started recording, that I don't think I'm retired forever. I want to come back. But I've had a lot of people say to me like, well, don't you like miss it? Didn't you really struggle with your identity? But I'd love to hear your thoughts on, I always said that because I kind of went out on my own terms, I wasn't injured, I wasn't going out of it through, I was some extent frustration, but it wasn't like I'd kept banging my head against a wall. I just was like, okay, this doesn't feel right, but I'm going to leave on a high rather than wait until I get forced out. Like, would that be why? I'm just curious as to if, as you did mention that specifically, if that would have made a difference in why I was able to transition so easily.
Yeah, I think it was that voluntary decision. If you had been, like you said about being forced out, that's probably the worst way to exit the sport, by being forced out because you're injured, or maybe if you're on a professional team, a contract has been dropped, and you have no control over it. And that lack of control can be very, very difficult to come to terms with. And, it's part of like this sort of self-determination theory that people want to have autonomy, which is kind of a control over what you do. And if you're forced into a decision or like a retirement because of an external force, it's not something that you decided. It's very, very hard to come to terms with. But when, like you said, you decided and you made that decision and you kind of made peace with that decision, it's a much, much easier transition, and probably why you still kind of have a positive outlook on the sport and and you have that maybe I'll get back, and that ability to look at it and think, yeah, that door is still open. I haven't closed it because it hasn't been shut for you.
Yeah, that's true.
And I know even when I kind of took my unofficial, I call more like a sabbatical than a retirement, but I was the same. I made the decision. I didn't want to be forced into it. I didn't want to come 6 months down the line and get another injury, but this time was career ending, because I knew that would be very hard to come to terms with. I said, I need to step away and I need to make that decision before I'm forced out of the sport, or you're kind of pushed out. Or that person who's kind of still always trying and trying, even when I'm in my 50s, I'm still in that same, always try to chase that one summer of greatness that I had when I was 22. And I was much happier with the decision, and I was very, like that, much, much more at peace with it. And then, like that, the door was left open. If I wanted to come back, now I have.
I think that's something important for everyone listening to remember as well, that like, if you do have to kind of close the door for a little while, it doesn't mean that it's closed forever. But if you kind of leave on your own terms for a little while, you can always come back to it. So I think that's really helpful. And thanks for answering that for me. So before we get on to the last few questions I have for you, I just want to ask you about one thing. As everyone listening knows, I am a huge fan of ice cream. It's kind of almost like a personal joke. And I saw a tweet from you a few weeks ago, maybe months ago, about you were at a conference and you put up a slide that said, ice cream makes us happier. And you said you were hungry, so you weren't sure if you agreed. But do you want to maybe tell us just quickly, if you can remember, why ice cream makes us happy?
Yeah, that was a talk I was at by he's a neuroscientist or a neurosurgeon. I can't remember what he was.
I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, he spoke a lot, but that was the one thing. It was he's a very, very smart man, and it was actually at a talk that was directed at secondary school students, so kind of 16-year-olds, and everything he was saying went over their head. He kind of went over my head because he was so manic and he knew so much, and there was so many big scientific words. But this was one thing that everyone tuned into, and they're like, ice cream, oh. And I think it was all to do with like reward pathways in the brain and how ice cream can be seen as a reward. And he was kind of talking about drugs and alcohol and how these can release high levels of dopamine, and that's why they're highly addictive. And I can't remember what it was, but I think it was just showing a picture of ice cream can even release some of these kind of happy hormones. Yeah. Not like it would never happen if someone was addicted to cocaine or something. If they saw a picture of cocaine, it's not going to be the same. But seeing a picture of ice cream reminds you of how happy it makes you. Yes. So that can even just increase your happy hormones. And I was going, I am quite hungry, but that does look like a good bowl of ice cream.
I just love that, because especially as it was ice cream of all things, I just thought that was funny. So I thought I'd bring that up. Okay, we're just going to...
It was an interesting one to focus on as well for me.
So I'm just going to take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then I will be back for the final four. I may have stopped running, but one of my favourite sponsors still makes its way into my food every day. Generation UCAN. You probably already know I'm a huge fan of UCAN. No, I used it as my sole fuel source in my 2:36 marathon. And yes, I was a little bit scared I would bonk, but my energy levels felt exactly the same the entire way. I didn't have those ups and downs, the sugar highs and sugar lows that gels gave me. But maybe you're thinking, yeah, Tina likes UCAN, but what is it? Well, UCAN is a carbohydrate source originally created for a little boy named Jonah, who continually had low blood sugar. Years later, UCAN is a favourite amongst many elites, including everyone's favourite, Meb Kaplesky. UCAN is giving Running for Real listeners 10% off using code RUNNING4REAL. So check out generationucan.com for more about UCAN and learn how it can help you control your blood sugar, fuel your races, and maybe make those bottomless pit stomachs of ours be happy for just a little bit longer post-run. Okay, Jessie, the Running for Real 4 questions here. So I want to start with maybe give us a unique nutrition tip of some kind.
Okay, a unique nutrition tip from me would be moderation. Not very unique, but I don't believe in fad diets. I don't believe in limiting what you eat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big believer in, if you want to have chocolate, have the chocolate.
That's my kind of girl.
Yeah. I think we tend to train enough that we can burn off the chocolate. I live in a house of athletes, and all of us, if we sit down in the evenings, there will be a chocolate bar opened and it will be gone before the end of the night. So
that's good.
If you don't want to eat something, don't buy it. Simple as.
That works, definitely. Okay, and how about a Running for Real moment?
Okay. When you had kind of mentioned these to me earlier, I was kind of thinking through them, and I suppose it's probably a bit of a negative one. It was probably one that a lot of athletes can kind of identify with. It was in 2014 actually, when I'd had my foot injury, my stress fracture, and I tried to get back to racing, having only trained for about 2 months. So I was really, really unfit. I'd been off my feet, and I was in France. I was at a race. I'd travelled over on my own because I'd booked them ages in advance. So I was like, well, I'm not going to waste the money. I'm going to go. And I remember standing on the start line. I mean, even when I was in warm up, I was just jogging around and got that feeling like, I really don't want to race. I would actually happily tear my hamstring right now rather than run this race. And I was standing in the blocks, and I was thinking I would prefer to be anywhere but here. And I felt awful. It was the worst I'd felt. Yeah. And I actually stopped in the race. No, the one time I've never stopped a race before, and I actually pulled up after 2 hurdles, which is only about 100 meters into the race, and I just walked off. I remember people running up to me being like, you know, obviously with their broken English, being like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" Expecting me to be injured, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I just walked off, and you could see people going, you know, they're expecting I need an ambulance or something. This girl has just stopped. And it was that was when I realized how important enjoyment was to it. That was the summer that I wasn't enjoying it. My running wasn't going well. I had kind of made the decision to move back home from the UK. And it was that moment when I realized I need to enjoy this if I'm going to continue in it. And so that's probably my Running for Real moment, is remembering to enjoy it, because racing will come, racing will go, injuries happen, but if you enjoy it, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Oh, that's so powerful. Thank you. That's really helpful. All right. And then what about a high moment?
I suppose my high moment was my kind of breakthrough race back in 2011. And I still remember, if people ask me, what's your standout race? This is always the race I remember. I remember it so well. So it was kind of the end of a season where every time I stepped on the track, I was running a personal best. It was one of those dream seasons that you always hope you're going to have. It was at the European Under-23 Championships. It was my first. I'd been to junior championships and not really done that well. I progressed to semi-finals or whatever, and I'd made it into the final. I'd run pretty well, ran season's best to get there. Or no, I hadn't. I'd run a PB earlier on, so I'd ran a PB already. So I qualified into the final, just barely. Was put in lane 8. So I kind of thought, okay, lane 8. No one likes being lane 8. Lane 8's like the lane no one wants, because you can't see what's going on. You're out on your own. And I remember my mum came to watch me. It was one of the last days of the championships, so there was lots of Irish people in the stadium watching. And I just ran the race of my life. Ran the exact stride pattern that if I said that my coach has said, this would be the perfect stride pattern. It's the perfect race plan. If everything goes right, you're going to run well. And I remember every single hurdle. And it's one of those races, I couldn't even tell you what I was thinking, what I was doing. It's like that flow that you get into sometimes, that like I was just running and everything was going right. And I crossed over the line. I ran a huge personal best. I placed 5th overall, which was my best major championships position. And I ran new personal best. I'd broken the Irish Under-23 record. I ran the B standard for the Olympic Games the next year. So it was just this amazing amazing race, and I got to do it. My mum was there. She pretty much ran half the race with me. And because it was it was an under-23 championships, it wasn't as strict as security. So I was nearly able to run up and give her a hug straight away afterwards, which was just such a nice moment, because now that you're senior, you don't really get to do that. You have to go through all the call rooms and go back through media zones. And it was just a really nice moment that my mum and my coach were literally standing right there, and I could just give them both a big hug. And that's kind of that moment. That's what I'm always chasing. That was like, I ran at European championships and stuff, but that was just such a lovely moment because it was such a big breakthrough. And it kind of put my name on the map, and that was all amazing. But it was just that feeling of seeing my mom bright red from running around with me and trying to catch up with me. And that's definitely a kind of a real memorable moment that I still cherish.
Yeah, so you should. And finally, what do you tell yourself when you're standing on the start line?
When I'm in good shape, I try to tell myself, because usually when I'm standing on the start line, and probably anyone can relate to this, they kind of go, oh my God, can't run this, I'm too nervous, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it anymore. Like that feeling, like I had said, oh my God, maybe I'll say I'm sick, I can't run anymore, because it's just nerves. And that's just typical race anxiety. And whenever I feel like that, I think this race will never be as hard as some of the training sessions you've done. Like training sessions you do are usually much, much harder. This is a one-off race. This is a showcase of all the hard work you've put in for the last couple of months. Don't chicken out now. Do give it your best, because you haven't worked for the last 8 months to chicken out now, and go and enjoy it. So that's kind of what I tell myself. Remind myself why I'm there. Yeah.
And I think actually everyone listening, you can take those exact words and use those and apply those to yourself as well. So Jessie, one more thing. I ask my guests if they will send me a photo of themselves in a power pose. So that's maybe how you would stand on the start line. And I'm sure being I guess middle distance, would you be classed? Runner? Are you middle?
I'm still called kind of a sprinter. 400 is like the limit of the sprint.
Okay. So you would definitely have some kind of power pose. I can just envision you standing there with hands on hips or whatever it is. So will you send us a photo, maybe one that's been taken or one of you with your power pose for the audience to see?
I will, of course.
Okay, great. All right, Jessie, thank you so much for your time. This was fantastic to learn about, and just really cool to kind of learn about your story and how you've applied it to what you're doing now. So thank you for sharing everything, and I look forward to following you in your journey. Is there a place you would recommend people go if they want to follow you?
Yeah, I suppose I'm very active on Instagram. I'm less active on Twitter, but my username for both of those is just Jessie Barr 247.
Okay, I will put links in the show notes for those. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
Wasn't that interesting? And remember, you can find everything we talked about at tinamuir.com/episode 13 if you are interested about learning more. If you want to see that picture of the ice cream that I talked about, which actually isn't as exciting as I thought it was at the time, but you heard what she said. You know, ice cream is good for us, right? That can justify us a future. So if you are enjoying these episodes, if you like the Evie episode or the Toby episode or this episode or any of the other episodes, by sharing this with your friends, your family, on Facebook pages and groups that you're a part of, that helps me so much. On your Instagram as well, whatever it may be, however you connect with people, if you can share this podcast, it really helps me. As I mentioned, I really want to climb up the rankings in iTunes, and I keep kind of almost getting there, but then falling back down again. So I really hope you will help me with that. It would mean so much to me. And remember, the sponsors who are GetV and UCAN are also a huge part of this, and you can find links to those in the show notes for any of the episodes. So next week, we are going to be talking to Mario Frioli, who is one of the thought leaders in our industry. He's also an Olympic level coach, and he was the former editor of Competitor magazine. You are going to love him. He's great to talk to. He's really just one of those people that you could just listen to all day. So I know you're going to love him. I want to thank you so much in advance for listening today. I shouldn't say it for advance. I should say thank you so much for listening today. And I want to thank you in advance for anyone who has shared or has reviewed or anything else. I'm so appreciative of any sharing that you will do with your friends and family. So thank you. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.